My name is Kaylin Vire. I am 34 years old and I live in a small apartment not far from the house I grew up in. For 5 years I spent almost every extra dollar I had paying off one big thing, the $680,000 mortgage on my parents' house. I always thought that when the last payment was done, there would be a special moment. Maybe a simple dinner with my parents. Maybe my dad would say he was proud of me for keeping the house safe from the bank. Maybe we would all just feel a little closer like we were a real team. Before I continue, don't forget to subscribe and join the awesome community. Drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what you think of the story. Dad, I got a phone call. My dad didn't even say hello. I know you paid off the mortgage, he said. All of it, but we are giving the house to your brother as his graduation present. And you are not invited to the party. I don't want you bringing your attitude to his big day. I pressed the phone to my ear and stared at the wall. My mouth went dry. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My brother had coasted through school while I worked extra jobs to keep the house safe. And now I was the problem. I asked my dad if he was serious. He said I was making everything about money and that the family should be happy for each other. Then he hung up. I just sat there in my quiet apartment, my heart beating fast, until I finally turned to the only person who knew the truth about all the payments and asked, "You want to tell them or should I?" 3 days later, my brother's big day did not feel like a celebration at all. Before I tell you how everything went wrong at that party, do me a favor. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. Your support helps more people hear what really happens when the responsible child finally stops staying quiet. There was a time when news like this would have hurt me just as much and I would have swallowed it, smiled and said I was fine. But that reflex didn't happen overnight. I grew up in a 2-story house on a quiet street in Rochester, New York. That house was in almost every memory I had. It wasn't special to anyone else, but it was where every birthday, every slammed door, every late-night talk and every laugh happened. My father, Thayer Vire, was proud of that house. He ran a small car repair shop on the edge of town and liked thinking of himself as the man who kept other families' cars working. At home, most of his attention went to my younger brother, Zephyr. Even when the house and the small business were struggling, my mom, Seraphine Vire, moved between us, cooking, paying small bills and calming things down when tempers flared. With me, she assumed I would figure things out. With Zephyr, she assumed the world would make room for him. By my early teens, I learned not to ask for much. If there was money for a school trip, it went to my brother. If there was a new jacket, he got it first. They treated me like I didn't need anything and I adapted. I studied, took any part-time job I could, and focused on building a life that didn't depend on my parents. When I left for college and then for work, that pattern became stronger. I took any job I could get, then finally found one that paid enough for me to breathe. I rented small apartments, drove used cars, cooked at home and told myself that being independent was better than needing help from my family. I told myself it was a kind of freedom even if it sometimes felt lonely. Back in Rochester, my father's shop started to struggle. Business slowed down. One costly repair on his own equipment wiped out a month's profit. A bad winter made customers wait to fix anything that wasn't urgent. The mortgage got behind. Late fees stacked up. My parents never told me directly, but I could hear the worry in their voices when I called. Sometimes their voices would sound quiet, tired or tight and I could tell they were scared. One time I visited home and opened the wrong kitchen drawer. Inside I found a thick stack of unopened letters from the bank. Holding them in my hands, I realized how close they were to losing the only stable place we had ever had. I also realized I could have just walked away and let them deal with it. I could have driven back to my apartment and pretended it wasn't my problem. But I didn't. I went to my old bedroom, sat on the bed and did the math. I counted what I earned, what I could save and what I could give. I realized that if I sent most of my paycheck to the mortgage, my own life would slow down. Promotions and raises would go to someone else's house instead of my savings. Trips, small luxuries and even the little things I wanted would belong to other people. I chose to do it anyway. The payments started quietly. Every month, money left my account and slowly chipped away at a balance that wasn't in my name. My dad talked about keeping the family home like it was all his hard work. My mom thanked me in small, private ways like a meal when I visited or a message saying she loved me, but she never made my dad admit what I was really doing. When things got really bad, my uncle Alec Roon stepped in. He helped my parents sign papers that tied the house and the loan to a safer arrangement as long as I kept paying. My name was on those papers, connected to responsibilities I was already carrying and to rights I barely thought about. I told myself it was enough to know my parents could sleep at night without worrying that a bank letter would take their house away. For a long time, life felt like a quiet routine. Work, bills, transfers, and a small wave of relief whenever I saw the mortgage balance shrink. I told myself that once the debt was gone, my parents and I would finally feel closer. From my apartment, I watched Rochester change through the seasons. Snow turned to slush. Trees burned orange and red before going bare again. Each change outside matched another statement under my bed, proof I was keeping a house I didn't live in. On weekends, I drove back to the old street. Nothing looked different on the outside. The siding still needed paint. The front steps still creaked. But inside, I felt a growing gap between me and my family. My father talked more about how hard he was fighting to keep the place, how much he sacrificed, and how proud he was. My role stayed unspoken, tucked away in the same drawer as the bank letters. My contributions were invisible. It was like I was part of the furniture, there but unnoticed. When Zephyr started his final year of college, everything in the house shifted toward him. Phone calls were about his classes, his plans, his achievements. My mom asked me to come to his graduation because she wanted pictures with both of her children. My dad planned a party and called it a fresh start for the family. I knew by then that the mortgage was almost gone. I could already picture the moment the last payment cleared. In my head, I imagined a simple, happy scene. We would gather in the kitchen. My parents would open the bank letter together. We would all understand what had been saved and who had saved it. I didn't expect a long speech. I hoped for honesty. But reality was nothing like that. There was no kitchen scene, no shared relief, no recognition. There was only the fact that the loan was finally cleared, and my parents had planned a celebration that didn't include me in the house I had saved. My heart sank. I felt invisible. I felt betrayed. It was a strange and heavy feeling, like I was standing in a room full of light but couldn't see myself reflected anywhere. I could have told myself I was overreacting. I could have tried to be happy anyway. I could have reminded myself that they kept the house even if they ignored me. I had told myself that story for years. But it sounded different now, like someone else had written it. It no longer made sense. I pulled out the folder with the trust documents from my closet and read it carefully. My name was on those pages, tied not just to responsibility, but to future control of the house. I realized the house was not just some family heirloom. It was part of an agreement my father had accepted when he was desperate. I was supposed to have rights too. That realization made me think about my uncle Alaric again. He had known the truth all along. For a moment, I thought about how it felt to be the responsible child who nobody noticed. All those years, all those payments, all that work. It had built something real, but no one had thanked me. No one had said, "We see you. We know what you did." It was like building a bridge that no one would ever cross except me. I remembered sitting in my apartment, counting the last few payments, feeling proud and scared at the same time. I had sacrificed trips, treats, even the little things that make life fun, all for a house I didn't live in. I had done it because I loved my family. Because I thought that's what families do. But now love feels confusing. It felt like it came with rules I didn't know about. As the days passed and the graduation party approached, I thought about what I would say if anyone asked. I wanted to explain. I wanted them to know the truth. But part of me was scared. Scared of being ignored. Scared of being told I was wrong for caring. When the day came, I dressed carefully, trying not to show my nerves. I drove to the house and my stomach twisted as I got closer. I saw the decorations, the balloons, the banners. Everyone was there, except me, at least in their minds. I felt like a shadow walking through a scene that wasn't meant for me. And yet, I knew something important. I knew the truth. I had done something huge. I had saved the house. I had kept my family safe when they could not. And no one could take that away from me, no matter what my father said. I had proof on paper and in every payment I had made. I took a deep breath. I reminded myself that being responsible didn't mean being invisible. It didn't mean being ignored. I remembered my uncle Alaric and the papers we had signed together. I remembered the years of work, the late nights, the sacrifices. And I realized, finally, that I could not let anyone erase my story. He had helped my parents take care of the house when things were really hard. The house was old, with creaky floors and big windows that rattled in the wind. There were months when my parents didn't have enough money to pay the bills, and I watched them worry every day. That's when he stepped in. He was the one who said that if I was going to do all that work, people needed to know about it. Sitting with him again, I realized he had always believed I understood how much power the papers gave me. The papers weren't just pieces of paper. They were proof. Proof that I had been the one paying for the house, that I had been responsible, that my choices mattered. After that meeting, I finally saw things clearly. The house I had been paying for was not a gift my dad could just give to my brother because it fit the story he wanted to tell. It was connected to the choices I had made, the money I had spent, and my name. For the first time, I stopped thinking about keeping everyone happy and started thinking about standing up for myself. I realized that if I didn't do something, the story would be written without me in it and all my hard work would be forgotten. Graduation weekend came. It didn't feel like a celebration for my brother. It felt like a test. A test to see if I could be erased from my own story. That Friday night, I drove onto my parents' street. The lights on the houses glowed warmly in the dark, cars were parked along the curb, and there was a big banner with my brother's name over the front door. From the outside, it looked like a happy story where sacrifices were rewarded. A story where everything turned out just the way my parents wanted it. Inside it was loud. Relatives filled the rooms with paper plates and cups, laughing and talking over each other. A few people hugged me quickly, surprised I was there. But then, almost immediately, their attention went back to my brother. People asked him about jobs, apartments, and what he would do with the yard once he moved in. The house I had been paying for month after month was already being talked about as if it belonged to him. Nobody questioned it. They were just repeating what my parents had told them. My dad walked through the crowd, telling a polished story about how he had kept the family home together, pushing through tough times. He spoke loudly and everyone listened. My mom stayed nearby, pouring drinks, nodding and keeping the focus where my dad wanted it. They didn't mention that I had been paying off the house. Across the room, my uncle Alaric watched quietly. He knew exactly what the papers said about who had been paying the mortgage and how the house was set up. He also knew my dad didn't plan to tell anyone that night. Finally, my dad called everyone to the living room. People sat on the couch and along the walls. He stood by the fireplace and talked about the house as the heart of the Vire family, about surviving hard years, and about how he believed his son would take over. Then he said the words I had been waiting to hear. The house would be my brother's graduation gift, the start of his future. Hearing that in front of everyone made it worse. It wasn't just a private hurt anymore. It was everyone agreeing that my part didn't matter. Alaric stepped in before that story could take over. In calm and simple words, he reminded my dad that the house was not just something to hand over with a toast. He mentioned the trust they had made when the bank letters piled up, the papers that existed because someone else had been paying. He didn't say my name, but people still looked at me. The room changed a little. My dad's applause didn't happen. People left earlier than usual. My dad brushed off Alaric, saying it was just a technical detail, and the night ended. I drove back to my apartment with new clarity. If I let my story stay in their hands, it would always be ignored. If I wanted to draw a line, I would have to do it myself. A few days later, I went back to the house alone. The lights and banner were gone. The street was quiet again. I climbed the steps and put my key in the lock, but it stopped halfway. The lock had been changed. That small resistance told me what no one would say out loud. When the door opened, my brother was there with moving boxes stacked behind him. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes looked at my key and then at me. The message was clear. This house wasn't for me anymore. The door clicked shut. I stood on the porch with a key that didn't work and realized my next step couldn't be a compromise. It would be setting a boundary my family had never expected. The quiet after that locked door followed me home. It didn't feel like confusion anymore. It felt like a choice my family had made, and I was finally seeing it clearly. The key on my coffee table was just metal, a reminder of how much I had put into a house I couldn't even enter. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the porch, the new lock, and my brother in the doorway as if the house had always been his. The story I had told myself about doing the right thing for my parents felt weak and tired. The next morning, I took a box from under my bed and put it on the kitchen table. I emptied it until it was full of paper. Statements, emails, mortgage copies, proof that I had really done all this. Each page showed a moment I chose their stability over mine. I added the trust papers Uncle Alaric had made them sign. I read them carefully like a contract. My name was in those papers, tied to responsibility and control. The house wasn't just a family memory, it was connected to the money I had spent. For the first time, I treated it like work. I made a list, what I couldn't change and what I could control. I couldn't make my parents fair or my brother thankful. But I could decide where my money went and how my name appeared on the house. That list led me to lawyer Dorian Voss. I brought all the papers and told him the story exactly. He looked at the papers, not the family drama, and showed me which parts let me stop transfers, freeze changes, and make sure any house decisions included me. Hearing it in simple legal words removed my last doubt. On paper, I wasn't overreacting. I had paid off a big debt and had the right to control the house. I called my cousin Lasara, who knew a lot about property. She confirmed my dad had already started trying to give the house to my brother, thinking I wouldn't speak up. Later, I stopped by our old neighbor Thalassa Wynn's house. She had watched our family for a long time and understood that the papers and extra cars meant something serious was happening. That night, I stacked the papers neatly, put them back in folders and placed them where I could reach them. They weren't old records anymore. They were tools. I was done waiting for my parents to be fair. What happened next would depend on me, not them. By the time our extended family gathered for the summer cookout near Lake Ontario, the house no longer felt like a backdrop. It felt like a line someone was trying to push me behind. Folding chairs circled the grills, kids ran between coolers, and relatives said the usual greetings. On the surface, it looked like another Vire gathering. But almost every conversation turned to my brother. People asked about his job interviews, apartments, and future plans. The house was talked about like a prize waiting for him. I listened as my dad told his favorite story. How he had worked hard, kept the house safe, and now saw his son stepping into a secure future. I walked slowly around the edge of the party, keeping my distance. I noticed small things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way the sun glinted on the lake. The smell of burgers and hot dogs grilling. The way kids ran barefoot across the grass. Even in a happy scene, the house felt like a shadow over me, a place that should have been mine, a place I had earned with my hard work and money. I decided then to finally stop hoping my parents would see it my way. I could not make them fair. I could not make my brother grateful. But I could make sure my part of the story could not be erased. I remembered Uncle Alaric's calm words and my lawyer's advice. They reminded me that I had power, that the papers I had were not just pieces of paper. They were proof. Proof that my name belonged in the story of the house. Later that evening, I went back to my apartment and looked at all the papers again. I read every line carefully. I made notes. I highlighted things that would protect me. I thought about what it would feel like to finally say, "This is mine and you cannot take it from me." I could see it in my mind, the locked door, the empty porch, my useless key. But now, instead of sadness, it felt like a challenge. I was ready to stand up. The next morning, I took a deep breath. I called Dorian Voss and asked him to start preparing the paperwork to make sure my rights were clear. I wanted to make sure no one could try to move the house out from under me again. Every phone call, every note, every document I had collected over the years became part of a plan. A plan to protect what I had worked for. I am also called Lasara Rune. She helped me double-check every number, every payment, every record of the house. Together we confirmed everything. My father's attempt to give the house to my brother without my permission was not a mistake. It was a gamble that I would stay quiet. That made it even clearer. I couldn't wait for fairness. I had to take action myself. As the summer went on, I felt a new kind of confidence. For years, I had worried about pleasing my parents. I had worried about keeping the peace. But now I could see my own strength. I could see that the house, the money I had spent, and the papers I held were not just about property. They were about me. About my choices, my sacrifices, and my name. By the time the next family gathering came around, I was ready. I knew what I could do, what I could control, and what I could protect. I wasn't going to let my part of the story be erased. The house had stopped being just a building. It had become a line, a boundary, and a symbol of my hard work. I understood now that I didn't need anyone else's approval to claim what was mine. The house was no longer just my parents' or my brother's. It was mine in every way that mattered. On paper, in truth, and in my heart. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the power to decide the story of my own life. When my family asked how they had managed to keep the house, my dad told them a story about saving money and hoping things would get better. He said they worked hard and tightened their belts. He didn't say anything about me because my name didn't fit into the story. My mom stayed close to him, filling plates with food and saying little things that made their story sound right. She smiled, laughed at the right times, and added small comments that made the house seem like it was going to stay with my brother. She talked about how happy she was that my brother would live in the house. She said it meant the home would stay in familiar hands. To anyone listening, it sounded like a simple and sweet choice. People would think it was just about family love and keeping things nice. They didn't talk about the years of payments I had made or the agreements that decided who really owned the house. I had not come empty-handed. I had a thin folder in my bag. It was the same one that had sat on my kitchen table while I carefully checked every paper, every payment, and every rule. I had no plan to wave it around, but I also had no plan to let my father's story become the only truth without some pushback. When a group of relatives sat at one of the picnic tables, the conversation came back to the house. I felt a choice appear in my mind. I could just nod and let the story pass, watching everyone believe the lie, or I could show them something that would make them think. I took out my folder. I opened it to a page that had my name written next to the rules of the trust. I put it carefully on the table. I watched their eyes move from the paper to my dad and then back to me. In that small circle, the idea that the house had been a simple gift began to disappear. Questions started. My parents' smooth story began to feel shaky. Relatives who had thought everything was simple began to realize that pieces were missing. My dad tried to wave it off as legal details, something boring and unimportant. My mom tried to steer the conversation back to happier topics. But the warm mood they wanted never returned. The cookout went on, but underneath it something had shifted. Later, a few cousins pulled me aside. Short messages appeared on my phone that evening. People who had believed my dad's story now understood that there was more going on, even if they didn't say it out loud. A day or two later, my brother posted a short video. In it, he stood in front of the house, pointing at the porch and windows as if he was showing something new. The caption said it was the start of his life in the house and how proud our parents were. Comments poured in from friends and family. They said congratulations and made plans to visit. Watching it from my apartment, I felt a tight knot in my chest. Everyone was celebrating a house that had already cost me so much. My part of the story disappeared with every comment. I did not answer. I did not try to correct anyone. I closed the app, looked at the folders lined up on my shelf, and let the quiet in my apartment remind me that I was done playing along. In the days before my brother's celebration, my schedule stayed the same, but my focus changed. I stopped hoping for a last-minute apology. I started treating everything ahead of me as part of the plans I had already made. The folders on my shelf were no longer background clutter. They were the boundary I intended to hold, the line I would not let anyone cross. On the morning of his big day, my cousin Lasara confirmed that the filings Dorian had prepared were now official in every system that mattered. My years of payments, my name, and the trust that my uncle Alaric had helped create were recorded in places my parents could not rewrite with a story. For the first time, the real version of what had happened stood next to theirs in something more permanent than memory. Later that morning, city officials walked up the front steps of the house I had paid for. Thalassa watched them from across the street. My parents opened the door expecting early guests, but instead they got formal notice that the property was under review. The house could not be given as a simple gift while the trust was active and a dispute was happening. The people on the porch didn't know about family stories or speeches. They only saw papers and rules that could not be ignored. Thalassa told me later that my dad looked unsure in a way she had never seen before. For years he had assumed that his story was the only one that would ever matter. But the envelopes in his hallway said otherwise. Around midday, a tow truck arrived for my brother's car. The lease he had treated as a symbol of his smooth future was behind on payments, and there was no one left to quietly cover the shortfall. Early guests watched in awkward silence while the car was pulled off the driveway and taken away. For once, the cost of his choices landed where it belonged instead of rolling toward me. That afternoon, I drove back to the old street. Dorian met me with a slim stack of documents. My uncle Alaric joined us with the folder that tied the house to the agreement he had helped create when my parents were desperate. Walking up the path, I felt nervous, but I also felt finished. I was not there to ask for a place. I was there to enforce the one I already owned. My parents answered the door with my brother behind them. Dorian explained the rules in calm, plain language. The trust would be enforced. The house could not be treated as my brother's personal gift while the dispute remained open. Any change in control would now require my consent. A short window was set for them to remove their belongings while a locksmith changed the locks. Where they went next would be their responsibility, not mine. In the weeks that followed, they adjusted to circumstances that finally matched their choices. My parents moved into a modest rental across town. My brother shared an apartment with people who judged him by what he did each day, not by promises my parents made about his potential. The house stayed where it had always been, but it no longer served as a prop in a story I was expected to applaud. I finished the repairs, met with Dorian and Alaric, and decided how to use the property by asking a question I had ignored for years. What would serve my life best? The answer was simple and practical. The house became an asset tied to my work and my name, not an altar to a version of family that only worked if I stayed small. Once those decisions were in motion, I stepped back from the rest. Calls went unanswered. Messages that tried to paint me as cruel or ungrateful stayed unopened. I told relatives I was done standing trial in conversations where the verdict had already been written. The distance felt strange at first, but it was the most honest thing I had ever done with them. Looking back, the turning point was not a single notice or the sound of a tow truck. It was the moment I stopped volunteering to disappear so everyone else could feel comfortable. Paying off that mortgage showed me how easily love can be used to excuse taking. Taking control of what I built showed me that love without respect is not a debt I owe to anyone, even if we share a roof or a last name. If there is anything I want someone listening to remember, it is this. Choosing yourself is not harm. Sometimes it is the first truthful thing you do for both your family and yourself.